They say justice is blind, but on Flight 402 to London, it had 20/20 vision. When Ricky Sterling, a veteran air marshal, decided to target 19-year-old Jordan for simply looking suspicious in first class, he thought his federal badge was a shield for his cruelty. He humiliated the boy, mocked his clothes, and threatened his future, convinced he was untouchable. But Sterling didn't know who was sitting 3 rows behind him, or that the text message just sent from the cockpit wasn't to the police, it was to the airline's board of directors. What happens next isn't just an emergency landing. It's the most satisfying instant karma you will ever witness. The air inside JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the scent of overpriced coffee and anxiety. For 19-year-old Jordan Banks, however, the anxiety wasn't about the flight. It was about what he was carrying. He gripped the handle of the battered velvet-lined instrument case so tightly his knuckles turned the color of ash. He was wearing a hoodie that had seen better days, faded navy blue with the logo of a community center in the Bronx, peeling off the chest, and sneakers that were scuffed at the toes. To the casual observer, Jordan looked like just another kid from the block. But the letter tucked into his inner pocket, signed by the Dean of the Royal Academy of Music in London, said otherwise. Final boarding call for Flight 402 to London Heathrow. The intercom crackled. Jordan took a deep breath. This was it. The scholarship covered everything, even the upgrade to business class, a donation from a patron he'd never met. He moved toward the gate, his heart hammering against his ribs. Standing near the jet bridge entrance was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and bad moods. Rick Sterling was a federal air marshal, though he wasn't flying covertly today. He was deadheading flying in a designated seat to get to an assignment in the UK. He wore a stiff tactical polo cargo pants and a gaze that dissected people like frogs in a biology class. Sterling had been on the job for 20 years. He was tired, his back hurt, and his patience for punks had evaporated somewhere around 2012. When he saw Jordan approaching the priority lane, his eyes narrowed. Jordan stepped up to the scanner, fumbling slightly with his digital boarding pass. "Excuse me." Sterling's voice cut through the noise, low and gravelly. He stepped out of the flow of passengers blocking Jordan's path. "Zone 1 is for first and business class only. Economy is that way." He pointed a thick finger toward the crowded general boarding lane. Jordan looked up, startled. "Oh, I know, sir. I'm in seat 4A. Sterling let out a short, sharp laugh that held zero humor. He looked Jordan up and down, lingering on the peeling hoodie and the scuffed sneakers. 4A. Right. Let me see the ticket. Jordan held out his phone. Sterling snatched it, not looking at the screen, but staring right into Jordan's eyes. "You steal this phone, kid?" "No." Jordan said, his voice quiet but steady. "It's mine, and so is the ticket." Sterling glanced at the screen, saw the valid QR code, and scowled. He shoved the phone back into Jordan's chest, hard enough to make the boy stumble. "Don't get comfortable. I'll be watching you." Jordan didn't reply. He just nodded, retrieved his phone, and walked onto the plane, clutching his violin case closer. He felt the heat of Sterling's glare burning a hole in his back. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was a different world. Soft jazz played, and the air smelled of lemon verbena. Jordan found 4A, a window seat that looked more like a recliner than an airplane chair. He hesitated, unsure where to put his case. It was too valuable to check, and he didn't want to cram it into the overhead bin if it would get crushed. "Can I help you with that, sir?" Jordan turned to see a flight attendant with a name tag that read Soraya. She had kind eyes and a professional smile that softened when she saw how nervous he was. I don't want it to get damaged, Jordan whispered. It's a violin. It's old. We have a coat closet right up front, Soraya said gently. I can put it in there for you. It'll be safe, I promise. Jordan hesitated, then nodded, handing it over like he was handing over a newborn baby. Please be careful. I will, she promised. As Jordan sat down and buckled up, he felt a heavy presence drop into the aisle seat of the row across from him. Seat 4D. It was Sterling. The Air Marshal didn't look at the safety pamphlet. He didn't look at the screen. He turned his body, angling his knees into the aisle, and fixed his eyes directly on Jordan. He pulled a pack of gum from his pocket, unwrapped a piece slowly, and popped it into his mouth. Chew, chew, chew. He didn't blink. He was marking his territory, and Jordan was the intruder. Comfortable? Sterling asked, his voice carrying easily across the aisle. Yes, sir, Jordan said, looking out the window. Enjoy it while it lasts, Sterling muttered, loud enough for the elderly couple in row 5 to hear. System glitches happen all the time. People end up where they don't belong. Jordan put his headphones on, but he didn't play any music. He just wanted to block out the sound of the man who hated him for existing. The first hour of the flight was smooth, but the tension in business class was jagged. While other passengers sipped champagne and adjusted their lie-flat beds, Sterling remained upright, a statue of agitation. He had ordered 3 double whiskies in 40 minutes. Soraya, the flight attendant, had noticed. She walked by Sterling's seat, offering water. Can I get you anything else, Mr. Sterling? Maybe some food? I'm fine. Sterling snapped, his face flushed. I'm just doing my job, keeping an eye on the threats. Soraya followed his gaze to Jordan, who was asleep with his mouth slightly open, a textbook on music theory resting on his lap. The young man in 4A, Soraya asked, confused. He's been asleep since takeoff. That's what they do, Sterling slurred slightly, the alcohol mixing with his natural aggression. They play innocent. That case he brought on. You check it. I put it in the closet, sir. It's a musical instrument. Yeah, a musical instrument. Or a breakdown rifle. Or a brick of fentanyl. Sterling unbuckled his seatbelt. The fastened seatbelt sign was on due to mild turbulence, but Sterling didn't care. He was federal. The rules were for the cattle in the back. He stood up and loomed over Jordan. Jordan woke up with a start as a heavy hand shook his shoulder. He pulled his headphones down, disoriented. What? What's wrong? Get up, Sterling commanded. Sir, the seatbelt sign is on, Jordan stammered. I said, get up, Sterling barked. The cabin went silent. The businessman in 3A lowered his newspaper. The elderly couple in 5 stared. Jordan unbuckled his hands, shaking. He stood up, towering slightly over Sterling, which only seemed to make the older man angrier. Empty your pockets, Sterling demanded. Why, I haven't done anything. I'm an Air Marshal boy. Sterling flashed his badge, flipping it open so aggressively it nearly flew out of his hand. And I have reasonable suspicion that you are transporting illicit materials. Now empty the pockets or I drag you to the galley and do it myself. Is there a problem here? The voice came from the cockpit door. It was the first officer, who had stepped out to use the lavatory. Sterling flashed the badge at the pilot. Federal business. Go back to flying the bus. The first officer hesitated. Technically, the Air Marshal had jurisdiction regarding security threats, but this felt wrong. Sir, if there's a security issue, we need to discuss this quietly. I am discussing it, Sterling shouted. He turned back to Jordan. That case, the velvet one. Who gave it to you? My grandfather, Jordan said, his voice trembling. He gave it to me before he died." "Liar," Sterling spat. "I know a mule when I see one. Your running product. Who are you meeting in London? Who paid for this seat? A scholarship, the Royal Academy?" Jordan was pleading now, tears pricking his eyes. He felt the weight of every gaze on the plane. He felt stripped naked, judged not for who he was, but for what Sterling decided he was. "Sit down, sit down." A passenger from row 2 called out, "Leave the kid alone." Sterling spun around, pointing a finger at the passenger. "You interfere with a federal investigation, and you'll be in cuffs when we land. Sit down and shut up." He turned back to Jordan and grabbed the front of his hoodie, bunching the fabric in his fist. "We're going to the galley. You're going to open that case, and then I'm going to strip search you, because I don't believe a word coming out of your mouth." "No." Jordan grabbed the armrest, resisting. "I didn't do anything." "Resisting good. That adds 5 years." Sterling yanked him into the aisle. Soraya, the flight attendant, stepped in front of Sterling, blocking the aisle. She was 5'4", but she stood like a linebacker. "Mr. Sterling, stop. You are disturbing the flight. The captain needs to be informed." "Get out of my way, sweetheart," Sterling growled. "My name is Soraya, and you are terrifying a passenger." "I'm securing this aircraft." Sterling shoved past her, dragging Jordan toward the front galley. Jordan tripped his sneaker, catching on the carpet, and he fell to his knees. Sterling didn't let go. He dragged the boy a few feet before Jordan could scramble back up. From the back of the first-class cabin in seat 1A, a man had been watching. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Sterling's car. He had been reading a leather-bound book, but now the book was closed. Mr. Adrian Pennyworth adjusted his glasses. He didn't yell. He didn't stand up yet. He simply reached for the flight phone in the cradle next to his seat. But he didn't call the flight attendants. He dialed a number that very few people on Earth possessed. In the galley, Sterling threw Jordan against the metal service carts. The crash was deafening. "Open the closet," Sterling ordered Soraya, who had followed them, shaking with rage. "Give me the case." "I will not," Soraya said. "Then I'll break it open myself." Sterling moved toward the closet. "Please," Jordan cried out. "It's a Stradivarius copy. It's from 1920. Please don't break it." "Stradhuvarius," Sterling mocked. "Fancy word for a drug container." He reached for the handle of the closet. "Touch that closet." A calm British voice cut through the chaos. "And you will spend the rest of your life in a hole so deep, not even sunlight will find you." Sterling froze. He turned slowly. Mr. Pennyworth was standing at the entrance of the galley. He looked relaxed, almost bored, but his eyes were cold steel. "Go sit down, old man," Sterling warned. "This is federal business." Pennyworth smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Federal business implies you are working for the government, Mr. Sterling. But as of 30 seconds ago, the government is very, very concerned about you." Sterling blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I suggest you release the boy," Pennyworth said, checking his watch. "Because the captain is receiving a message right now, and I believe it concerns your employment status." The silence in the first-class galley was heavier than the pressurized doors sealing them in. Air Marshal Sterling stared at the older man, Adrian Pennyworth, with a mixture of confusion and contempt. Sterling was used to fear. He was used to people shrinking away when he flashed his badge. But Pennyworth looked at him the way a lion looks at a particularly annoying mouse. "You think you're funny?" Sterling sneered, tightening his grip on Jordan's hoodie. Jordan gasped for air, his hands clawing uselessly at Sterling's thick wrist. "I don't care if you're the Pope. Back off." Pennyworth didn't back off. He took a single step forward, entering Sterling's personal space with an elegance that was almost terrifying. "I am not the Pope, Mr. Sterling. I am Adrian Pennyworth. Does the name ring a bell? Or do you only read the back of cereal boxes?" Sterling hesitated. The name did sound familiar. It wasn't a celebrity name, but something he'd seen on letterheads or perhaps in the news regarding mergers and acquisitions. But his ego wouldn't let him pause. "I don't care who you are. This kid is a threat. The only threat on this plane," Pennyworth said, his voice dropping to a glacial whisper, "is the man assaulting a scholarship student for the crime of wearing a hoodie in first class." At that exact moment, a distinctive chime echoed through the cabin. Bing bong. It wasn't the seatbelt chime. It was the specific, urgent tone for the cabin crew to pick up the interphone immediately. Soraya, who was standing guard by the cockpit door, snatched the receiver. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Sterling. She listened for only 10 seconds, her knuckles turning white on the handset. "Understood, Captain," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, immediately." She hung up and turned to the other passengers who were craning their necks to see. Then she looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, the captain requires you to return to your seat, immediately." Sterling laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "The captain doesn't give me orders. I give the orders when there's a security risk." "The captain has declared a level 4 threat in the cabin," Soraya announced, her voice ringing out clearly. Sterling smirked. "Good. He agrees with me. Finally." He yanked Jordan up. "Come on, kid. We're going back to my seat. I'm cuffing you to the armrest until we land." "No, sir," Soraya said, stepping forward again. This time she didn't look scared. She looked empowered. "The level 4 threat isn't the boy." Sterling froze. "What? The threat is you." The air seemed to leave the room. Sterling blinked his brain, unable to process the information. "You're crazy. I'm a federal air marshal. You are a passenger who is physically assaulting another passenger and interfering with the flight crew," Pennyworth interjected smoothly. "And I believe if my phone is working correctly, the board of directors of Royal Atlantic Airways has just informed Captain Miller that your jurisdiction has been administratively suspended, pending an investigation, which started about 3 minutes ago." Sterling looked at Pennyworth, then down at the older man's hand. Pennyworth was holding a sleek black satellite phone. You called the board," Sterling stammered. "From the plane. I own 40% of the airline, you imbecile." Pennyworth said, his voice sharpening like a blade. "I didn't just call the board. I called the CEO. He was having dinner in Paris. He was not happy to be interrupted. He was even less happy to hear that a federal agent was brutalizing a 19-year-old musician on his flagship route." Sterling's face went from red to a pale, sickly purple. He released his grip on Jordan's hoodie. Jordan slumped against the galley wall, sliding down to the floor, clutching his chest and wheezing. "You can't do that," Sterling whispered. "You can't suspend me mid-air." "I can do whatever I please when I'm at 35,000 feet and paying for the kerosene," Pennyworth replied. "Now sit down. Before you make a mistake, you can't undo." But Sterling was a man who had built his entire identity on dominance. When cornered, he didn't surrender. He attacked. "This is a conspiracy!" Sterling shouted, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip, where his concealed firearm sat in its holster. "You're all in on it. The kid, the crew, the old man. This is a hijack. Everyone back up." The atmosphere shifted instantly from tense to life-threatening. The moment Sterling's hand brushed his waist, the dynamic of the cabin shattered. "He's reaching," a passenger in 2B screamed. Soraya dropped to a crouch, instinctively shielding Jordan with her body. "Code red! Code red!" She yelled toward the cockpit camera. The plane banked, hard. It wasn't the gentle turn of a commercial adjustment. It was a sharp, aggressive bank that threw everyone off balance. The engines roared as the throttle was pushed forward. The nose of the plane dipped. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice boomed over the PA system, loud and devoid of the usual soothing pilot tone. "This is Captain Miller. All passengers take your seats immediately. Crew take emergency stations. We are initiating an emergency diversion to Boston Logan International Airport. We have a security situation on board." Sterling stumbled as the floor tilted beneath him. He grabbed the galley counter to stay upright. "You're landing the plane because of me. You just reached for a weapon in a dispute you started," Pennyworth said, bracing himself against the bulkhead. He hadn't moved to his seat. He stood his ground. "You have escalated this from a grievance to a felony." "I am the law," Sterling roared, pulling his badge out again, as if the piece of metal could stop the plane from turning. "I'm in charge here." "Not anymore, Rick," a new voice said. The cockpit door buzzed and clicked open. Captain Miller stepped out. He was a tall man, ex-Air Force, with silver hair and shoulders that filled the doorway. He wasn't holding a weapon, but he held something more powerful: absolute command of his vessel. Behind him, the first officer was flying the plane, communicating rapidly with air traffic control. "Captain," Sterling said, panting, "these people are interfering with federal business. I need you to arrest this man." He pointed at Pennyworth, "and secure this prisoner." He pointed at Jordan. Captain Miller looked at Jordan, who was trembling on the floor, comforted by Soraya. He looked at Pennyworth, who gave him a subtle nod. Then he looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Captain Miller said, his voice cutting through the engine noise, "I have just spoken to the Deputy Director of the Federal Air Marshal Service on a patch-through call." Sterling's eyes widened. You called my boss." The Deputy Director was very interested to hear why Flight 402 was declaring an emergency. Miller continued calmly. He was also very interested to hear Mr. Pennyworth's account of the last 20 minutes. "Do you know what he told me?" Sterling didn't answer. His mouth hung open. "He told me that you are currently on administrative leave, effective immediately. He also ordered you to surrender your weapon to me and take a seat in the rear of the aircraft until we land." "Liar!" Sterling screamed. "You're lying. You're protecting the mule." "Surrender the weapon, Rick," Miller said, stepping forward. "Don't make this worse. Boston SWAT is already rolling the trucks. If you land with that gun on your hip after disobeying a direct order from the pilot and your director, you're looking at 20 years for air piracy." The cabin was silent. The only sound was the rushing wind outside and Jordan's soft sobbing. Sterling looked around. He saw the disgust in the passengers' faces. He saw the unyielding wall of the captain. He saw Pennyworth's cold, victorious stare. And he saw Jordan, just a kid in a hoodie, holding a violin case receipt in his pocket, terrified out of his mind. Sterling's hand hovered over his hip. For a second, everyone held their breath. If he drew the gun, people would die. "Don't do it," Pennyworth said softly. "It's over." Sterling's shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a crushing realization of reality. He wasn't the hero. He wasn't the predator anymore. He was the prey. Slowly, with shaking hands, Sterling lifted his shirt. He unclipped the holster. He held it out butt first to Captain Miller. Miller took the weapon and handed it to the first officer behind him, who locked it in the flight deck safe. "Get him out of my sight," Miller said, his voice filled with disdain. "Soraya, escort Mr. Sterling to seat 32E in economy. Zip-tie his hands if he so much as breathes too loud." Sterling looked at the captain. "Economy." "It's where you belong," Pennyworth said. "Move," Miller ordered. Sterling walked down the aisle past the business-class pods, past the curtain he had tried so hard to protect. Every eye was on him. No one looked away. A woman in row 5 hissed, "Shame on you." A man in row 8 slowly clapped a mock applause that others joined in on a rhythm of humiliation following him all the way to the back. When he reached row 32, a middle seat between two large men who had heard the commotion and were looking for an excuse to tackle someone. Sterling sat down. He was no longer the king of the sky. He was cargo. Back in first class, Captain Miller knelt down next to Jordan. "Son," Miller said gently. "Are you all right?" Jordan wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I just wanted to go to school," he whispered. "I have an audition." "You're going to make that audition," Miller promised. "But first we have to make a stop in Boston, to take out the trash." Miller stood up and looked at Pennyworth. "Thank you, Adrian. Always a pleasure having you on board." "The pleasure is mine, Captain," Pennyworth replied, straightening his cuffs. "Although I do expect a refund on my ticket for the delay." Miller chuckled. "I think we can arrange that, and perhaps an upgrade for the young man." "Way ahead of you," Pennyworth said, looking at Jordan. "Once we deal with the authorities in Boston, Jordan is sitting in 1B. I want to hear all about this violin." The plane descended through the clouds, the city of Boston rising up to meet them. Flashing red and blue lights covered the tarmac below. To Jordan they looked like Christmas lights. To Sterling, wedged in seat 32E, they looked like the end of his life. But the karma was only just beginning, because while Sterling thought he was just facing a reprimand, he didn't know that Mr. Pennyworth had one more connection to make, this time to the media. The descent into Boston was turbulent, mirroring the chaos inside Ricky Sterling's mind. As the wheels of the massive jet kissed the tarmac with a screech of burning rubber, Sterling sat wedged in seat 32E, his wrists zip-tied together. He wasn't looking at the passengers around him anymore. He was staring at the seat-back pocket, calculating. "I'm a Fed," he told himself, the mantra repeating like a broken record. "Local cops won't touch me. The captain is overreacting. Once we're on the ground, I'll flash the badge, explain the kid was acting erratic, and this whole thing goes away. It's just a misunderstanding, a protocol error." He convinced himself that the flashing lights outside weren't for him. They were for the security threat he had identified. They were coming to arrest the boy. The plane taxied to a remote corner of the airfield, far away from the terminal gates. This was the penalty box, where planes went when they carried contagious diseases, bomb threats, or hijacked crews. The engines whined down. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Stay seated," a flight attendant commanded over the PA. "No one moves until authorities board the aircraft." The forward door hissed open. Cold Boston air rushed in. Sterling straightened his spine. He prepared his speech. He would use words like insubordination, probable cause, and national security. Heavy boots thudded against the floorboards. A tactical team from the FBI's hostage rescue team, HRT, clad in olive drab and heavy armor, moved down the aisle. They bypassed business class. They bypassed the sobbing Jordan in row 4. They moved with the precision of a scalpel toward the back of the plane. Sterling saw them coming. He nodded at the lead agent, a man whose eyes were hidden behind ballistic goggles. "Agent," Sterling barked, trying to sound authoritative, despite the zip ties. "I'm the Air Marshal. The suspect is in row 4. I need these ties cut immediately so I can debrief you." The lead agent stopped. He looked down at Sterling. He didn't reach for a knife to cut the ties. He reached for his radio. "Target acquired. Seat 32E. Secure." 2 agents grabbed Sterling by the shoulders. They didn't help him up. They hauled him up. "Hey, watch the arm," Sterling shouted. "I'm on the job. I'm one of you. You're a suspect in an aggravated assault and interference with a flight crew," the lead agent said, his voice muffled by a balaclava. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." "This is a mistake," Sterling screamed as they shoved him down the narrow economy aisle. "That kid is a mule. Check the case. Check the velvet case," as they dragged him past. First class. Sterling dug his heels in. He saw Jordan sitting there, still shaking with Soraya, the flight attendant rubbing his back. And he saw Adrian Pennyworth, standing in the galley, holding the velvet violin case. "Open it!" Sterling yelled, foaming at the mouth. "Open it and show them the drugs. Show them I was right." Pennyworth looked at the FBI agents. "Gentlemen, if you would indulge me for a moment, it might calm the prisoner down." The lead agent hesitated, then nodded. "Make it fast." Pennyworth placed the case on the galley counter. He undid the brass latches with a slow, deliberate click. He lifted the lid. There were no bags of white powder. There were no false bottoms. Resting on the crushed red velvet was a violin of heartbreaking beauty. The wood was a deep honey-colored maple varnished to a shine that looked like liquid amber. It had the wear and tear of a century of music scratches that told stories, a neck worn smooth by the hands of masters. "This Pennyworth," said his voice projecting to the silent cabin, "is a 1920 Roth reproduction of a Stradivarius. It was gifted to Mr. Jordan Banks by his grandfather, a jazz musician who played in the Harlem Renaissance circuit. It is not contraband. It is a piece of American history." Pennyworth reached into the case and pulled out a small rosin block. He held it up to Sterling's face. "Is this the fentanyl you were worried about, Rick?" Sterling stared at the instrument. His brain scrambled for an excuse, a pivot, anything. He could have hollowed it out. It could be inside. "Get him off my plane," Captain Miller said from the cockpit door. "Now." The agents shoved Sterling forward. He stumbled out of the door and onto the metal stairs. But the nightmare wasn't over. As Sterling emerged into the cold air, blinding lights hit him. Not police strobes, camera flashes. Dozens of them. News crews were lined up behind the police barricade on the tarmac. CNN, Fox, BBC, local affiliates. They were all there. "How?" Sterling muttered, blinking against the glare. "How are they here?" Pennyworth stepped out onto the landing platform, behind him, leaning close to Sterling's ear. "I told you, Rick, I own 40% of the airline, and I own 3 media conglomerates. I made a few calls while we were descending. I thought the world should see the face of the man who assaults children." Sterling was paraded down the stairs. The cameras zoomed in on his zip-tied wrists. They captured his disheveled hair, his wild eyes, his tactical shirt stained with sweat. A reporter shouted over the wind, "Mr. Sterling, is it true you attacked a scholarship student? Mr. Sterling, are you being charged with a hate crime?" "Mr. Sterling, the DOJ has just issued a statement suspending your credentials. Do you have a comment?" Sterling didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed up. For the first time in 20 years, the bully had no voice. He was shoved into the back of a black SUV. the heavy door slamming shut with a finality that sounded like a coffin closing. 2 hours later, Ricky Sterling sat in a stark concrete room inside the Massachusetts State Police Barracks at Logan Airport. The handcuffs were metal now, tight against his wrists, biting into the skin. The room had a two-way mirror, a metal table, and a smell of stale coffee and fear. Sterling knew this room. He had put people in rooms like this hundreds of times. He knew the tactics. He knew they would let him sweat. But he still believed he had an out. The union, he thought. The brotherhood. Once I get my rep on the phone, this turns into a procedural slap on the wrist. I'll lose a week's pay, maybe get a desk transfer. The door buzzed and opened. It wasn't a union rep. It wasn't a sympathetic cop. It was a woman in a charcoal power suit that cost more than Sterling's annual salary. She carried a leather briefcase and walked with the lethal grace of a jaguar. "Who are you?" Sterling demanded. "I want my union rep." "Your union rep isn't coming, Mr. Sterling," the woman said, placing her briefcase on the table. She didn't sit. She stood over him. "My name is Reginald Graves. I am the chief legal counsel for the Banks family." "The Banks family?" Sterling scoffed. "The kiddies from the Bronx. He doesn't have a chief legal counsel." "He does now," Graves said, opening a file. "Mr. Adrian Pennyworth has retained my firm on Jordan's behalf, and I am here to inform you of the civil lawsuit we are filing against you personally." "Civil suit?" Sterling laughed. "I have qualified immunity. I'm a federal agent." Graves smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Qualified immunity protects you when you are performing your duties within the scope of the law. It does not protect you when you commit battery, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations based on racial profiling against a passenger who was cleared by TSA." She slid a tablet across the table. "Press play." Sterling looked at the screen. It was a video. It was shaking slightly, filmed from row 2 on the plane. The audio was crisp. "I'm an air marshal, boy. Empty the pockets. I didn't do anything. I know a mule when I see one." The video showed Sterling yanking Jordan by the hoodie. It showed the violent shove into the galley. It showed the terror in the boy's eyes. "This video, sir," Graves said, "has been viewed 4 million times in the last 90 minutes. The hashtag #FireRickSterling is trending #1 globally, even ahead of the Super Bowl." Sterling felt the blood drain from his face. It looks worse than it was. I had intel." "No, you didn't," Graves snapped. "We have the flight manifest logs. You were deadheading. You were off the clock until you landed in London. You decided to play cowboy because you didn't like the way a young black man looked in first class." The door opened again. This time it was the FBI special agent in charge, Agent Rossi. He looked tired and angry. "Graves, you done?" Rossi asked. "Just about," Graves said. Rossi looked at Sterling with pure disgust. "Rick Sterling, you are hereby under arrest for violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, deprivation of rights under color of law. We are also tacking on charges for interfering with a flight crew and simple assault." "Title 18, Sterling choked. That's federal prison." "Up to 10 years, Rossi confirmed. "And Rick, the director of the Air Marshal Service, just called. You're fired, effective immediately. You lose your pension. You lose your benefits. You lose your right to carry a firearm." Sterling slumped forward, his forehead hitting the cold metal table. The silence in the room was absolute. The shield he had hidden behind for 2 decades, the badge, the authority, The arrogance had evaporated. "One more thing," Graves added, pausing at the door. "Mr. Pennyworth wanted you to know something." Sterling looked up, his eyes red. "What?" "Jordan's audition," she said. "The Royal Academy called. They saw the news. They've already accepted him. Full ride. And Mr. Pennyworth has arranged for a private charter to take him to London tonight. He'll be drinking sparkling cider in a leather seat while you are being processed in county holding." Graves tapped the table. "Enjoy the bologna sandwiches, Rick." She walked out, her heels clicking like the ticking of a clock running out of time. Rossi followed her, the heavy steel door slamming shut, locking Ricky Sterling in a box of his own making. Back at the private aviation terminal of Logan Airport, the scene was very different. Jordan sat in a plush lounge chair, holding a cup of hot chocolate. His violin case was next to him, untouched and safe. Adrian Pennyworth sat opposite him, reviewing some documents. "Mr. Pennyworth," Jordan asked softly. "Call me Adrian's son." "Why did you do all this?" "The plane landing the lawyers. You didn't have to." Adrian looked up, taking off his reading glasses. "Jordan, the world is full of men like Rick Sterling. They think power is a weapon to be used against those they deem lesser. I have spent my life acquiring power, real power, and the only decent way to use it is to protect those who actually bring beauty into the world." He gestured to the violin case. "You play music. That man played games with people's lives. Today the music won." A uniformed attendant walked over. "Mr. Pennyworth, Mr. Banks, your Gulfstream is ready for departure to London." Jordan stood up. He grabbed his violin. He looked out the window at the flashing lights of the police cruisers in the distance, far across the tarmac. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air that finally felt free. "Ready?" Adrian asked. "Ready," Jordan said. They walked toward the jet, leaving the chaos behind, soaring upward into a sky that was big enough for everyone, except perhaps for Rick Sterling. 5 years later. London, England. The rain in London didn't just fall, it accused. It was a cold, relentless drizzle that seemed to seep through the seams of Ricky Sterling's cheap, high-visibility vest, settling into his bones like a permanent chill. He stood on the pavement outside the stage door of the Royal Albert Hall, shifting his weight from one aching foot to the other. He was 55 years old, but if you looked at him under the harsh amber glow of the street lamps, you would guess 70. The past 5 years had carved deep ravines into his face. His skin, once flushed with the ruddy arrogance of authority, was now grey and slack, hanging loosely over his jaw. He had lost 2 teeth on the left side of his mouth, a souvenir from a disagreement in the shower block of a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania, and he had never had the money to fix them. He adjusted the plastic earpiece in his ear. It was static-filled and uncomfortable a toy compared to the military-grade comms he used to wear. "Sterling Position 1, stop leaning on the wall, mate. It's not a holiday camp." The voice crackled in his ear. Baz, his supervisor. Baz was 22, had a neck tattoo of a scorpion, and had never been on an airplane in his life. But Baz was the shift lead for Goliath Security Services, and Sterling was just a temp on a 0-hour contract. "Copy," Sterling mumbled, pushing himself off the wet brickwork. He hated the earpiece. He hated the vest. But mostly he hated the shoes. They were cheap, steel-toed boots that rubbed his heels raw. He remembered his old boots, custom-fitted tactical gear polished to a mirror shine. He remembered how people used to look at those boots. They would look at the boots, then the gun on his hip, and then they would look down. They respected the power. Now nobody looked at Sterling, Or if they did, their eyes slid over him like he was a traffic cone or a bin bag. He was part of the urban furniture, invisible and necessary only for the unpleasant tasks. Inside the Royal Albert Hall, the muffled roar of 3,000 people clapping sounded like distant thunder. It was the Gala for the Global Arts, a black tie event patronized by the British monarchy and the global elite. Tickets for the nosebleed seats cost more than Sterling had earned in the last 2 years combined. He stood in the gutter, watching the puddles ripple with the vibrations of the applause. He tried not to think about where he should have been if he hadn't taken that flight, if he hadn't targeted that kid. He would be retiring soon. He would have had a pension, a lake house, respect. Instead, he had a bedsit in Croydon that smelled of damp plaster and boiled cabbage. He had a criminal record, deprivation of rights under colour of law, that flagged him on every background check, barring him from carrying a weapon, working in law enforcement, or even getting a job as a mall guard. He was lucky to be here standing in the rain, guarding the cars of people who wouldn't spit on him if he were on fire. The heavy iron stage doors groaned open. "Heads up, team," Baz's voice barked. "Principal talent is exiting. VIP movement. Hold the line. Don't let the paps rush the vehicles." The atmosphere on the street shifted instantly. The lethargy of the waiting press pack vanished. Photographers who had been smoking cigarettes and checking their phones suddenly snapped into action, hoisting massive lenses onto their shoulders. A frantic energy took over the air electric, with the hunger for celebrity. A sleek obsidian-black Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled silently to the curb, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The driver, a man in a sharp grey uniform, stepped out and snapped open a large umbrella. Sterling stiffened. His job was simple: be a human barrier. He turned his back to the door, facing the screaming photographers, spreading his arms wide to create a pocket of space for the star to enter the car. "Back up!" Sterling shouted, his voice raspy. "Give them room." "Who is it?" a photographer yelled, jostling against Sterling's shoulder. "Is it the soprano?" "I don't know, just back up." Sterling shoved the man back. He didn't care who it was. He just wanted the door to close so he could go home. But then the crowd went oddly quiet for a split second before erupting into a blinding storm of camera flashes. Click, 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 click. The strobe effect was disorienting, turning the rainy night into a flickering black and white movie. Sterling risked a glance over his shoulder. Walking out of the warm, golden light of the hallway was a young man. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with a posture that suggested he was suspended from the sky by a golden thread. He wore a tuxedo that was a masterclass in tailoring midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light with a silk lapel that gleamed. He moved with a fluid, easy grace, acknowledging the crowd with a small, humble wave. He looked like a prince. He looked like the future. And in his right hand, gripped firmly by a leather handle, was a rectangular case covered in worn burgundy velvet. Sterling's breath hitched in his throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He knew that case. He saw the scuffs on the corner. He saw the brass latches. He remembered the texture of it under his fingers when he had threatened to smash it open in the galley of Flight 402. His eyes traveled up from the case to the man holding it. It was Jordan Banks. But it wasn't the terrified 19-year-old boy in a peeling hoodie. This was a man of 24 who commanded the space around him. His face had thinned out, the baby fat gone replaced by the sharp angles of adulthood and the quiet confidence of someone who has mastered their craft. Walking beside him, looking frail but immaculately dressed in a tuxedo and a silk scarf, was Adrian Pennyworth. The old billionaire was leaning on a cane now, but his eyes were still bright, scanning the crowd with a protective grandfatherly pride. Sterling felt a physical blow to his stomach. Bile rose in his throat. Of all the security gigs in London, of all the nights. "Turn away," his brain screamed. "Don't let him see you." Sterling ducked his head, pulling the collar of his high-vis vest up, trying to turtle into the fabric. He stared at the wet pavement, at the reflection of the streetlights in the oily puddles. He prayed to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. Make me invisible. Just let him get in the car. "Mr. Banks, over here." "Jordan. The BBC said your performance was historic." One photo. "Show us the Stradivarius." Jordan paused under the awning. He didn't rush. He stopped to sign a program for a young girl who had squeezed through the barricade. He smiled at her, a genuine, radiant smile that made Sterling's heart ache with a twisted mix of jealousy and shame. Sterling was trapped. He was the anchor man for the door. He was standing directly in the path between Jordan and the open door of the Rolls-Royce. Jordan handed the program back to the girl and turned toward the car. He took a step, then another. Sterling held his breath, his eyes fixed on the tips of Jordan's polished patent leather shoes. Just walk past. Just walk past. The shoes came closer. They entered Sterling's peripheral vision. And then they stopped. Right in front of Sterling's mud-splattered steel-toed work boots. The silence that followed was personal. The paparazzi were still shouting, the rain was still falling, but inside the bubble of space between the two men, there was a vacuum. "Excuse me," a voice said. It was a deep, melodious voice, resonant, the voice of a man who listened to pitch for a living. Sterling had no choice. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his cap, running down his nose. He blinked against the glare of the flashbulbs and looked into the eyes of the man he had tried to destroy. Jordan Banks looked back. At first, there was just polite confusion. Jordan saw a tired, broken security guard blocking his path. But then, Jordan's gaze sharpened. He looked at the eyes, the one part of a person that never truly changes. Jordan's brows knit together. He tilted his head slightly to the side. The recognition didn't hit him like a shock. It washed over him like a slow, sad realization. "I know you," Jordan said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, spoken soft enough that only they could hear. Sterling's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He tried to swallow, but his throat was full of dust. I'm just doing my job, sir." He finally rasped, his voice cracking. Adrian Pennyworth, standing a step behind Jordan, squinted through his spectacles. He leaned in, peering closely at Sterling's ruined face. The old man's expression went from curiosity to shock and then to a cold, hard disdain. "Good heavens," Pennyworth muttered. "Is that Rick?" Sterling flinched as if he had been slapped. Hearing his name, his first name spoken by these men, was unbearable. It stripped away the anonymity he had been hiding behind. "I didn't know you were in London," Jordan said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded strangely warm, almost detached. He was looking at Sterling not as a monster, but as a curiosity. A relic. I got out a year ago." Sterling stammered the words, tumbling out in a panic. He felt the need to explain, to beg, to justify. "Deported back to the UK. Hard to find work. The records, you know." Jordan looked him up and down. He took in the cheap, ill-fitting vest. the missing teeth, the red wind-chapped hands shaking from the cold. He saw the complete and total demolition of a human being. Sterling waited for the blow. He expected Jordan to laugh. He expected him to call the head of security and have him fired on the spot. He expected Pennyworth to spit on him. He braced himself for the anger he knew he deserved. But Jordan didn't get angry. His expression softened. The tension left his shoulders. He looked at Sterling with an emotion that cut deeper than any knife, burned hotter than any insult. Pity. Jordan Banks, the boy. Sterling had called a mule a thug. A criminal was looking at him with pure, unadulterated pity. "It's a cold night to be standing out here," Jordan said gently. Sterling froze. He couldn't process the kindness. It felt alien. It felt wrong. Jordan shifted the velvet violin case, the instrument worth millions, the instrument Sterling had treated like garbage, to his left hand. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a wallet. He didn't make a show of it. He didn't flash cash for the cameras. He simply slid a single crisp banknote out. A 50-pound note. Jordan reached out and took Sterling's hand. Sterling's hand was rough, callous, and dirty. Jordan's hand was warm, smooth, and strong, the hand of an artist. Jordan pressed the money into Sterling's palm and closed Sterling's fingers over it. "Get yourself a warm meal when you get off shift, Rick," Jordan said. Sterling stared at his own fist. He was shaking violently now. The humiliation was total. He was the beggar at the feast. The law was taking full charity from the suspect. "Why?" Sterling whispered, his voice trembling. He looked up, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "After what I did to you, I tried to ruin your life. I almost broke your hands." Jordan paused. He looked at the violin case, then back at Sterling. He stood tall, the flashbulbs haloing around him like a crown. "My grandfather taught me something before he gave me this violin," Jordan said. "He told me that hate is too heavy a burden to carry when you're trying to fly. If I hated you, Rick, I'd still be in that galley with you. I'd be trapped in that moment forever." Jordan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not the villain of my story anymore. You're not even a chapter. You're just a footnote. And I don't hold grudges against footnotes." He patted Sterling on the shoulder, 2 gentle taps. "Take care of yourself." Jordan turned and slid into the back of the Rolls-Royce. The leather interior looked warm, inviting a different universe. Pennyworth lingered for a second longer. He looked at the money in Sterling's hand, then up at Sterling's face. He adjusted his scarf, a dry, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "I told you on the plane, Mr. Sterling," Pennyworth said. "The music always wins." Pennyworth got in. The heavy door thudded shut with a sound like a bank vault closing. The lock clicked. "Clear the vehicle," Baz shouted in Sterling's ear. "Move it, Sterling. Get out of the way." Sterling stumbled back, almost tripping over his own feet. The Rolls-Royce pulled away the tires, splashing a wave of dirty, oily gutter water onto Sterling's trousers. He didn't wipe it off. He didn't move. He stood there in the rain, clutching the 50-pound note so tight his knuckles turned white. The tail lights of the Phantom faded into the London fog, disappearing like a dream. The paparazzi packed up, chasing the car or heading for the pub. The donors were gone. The music had stopped. Sterling was alone. He looked at the money. It was enough for a few pints, maybe a curry. But it felt heavy. It felt like lead. It was proof that he had been forgiven, and in that forgiveness he had been dismissed. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't a rival. He was nothing. "Sterling," Baz yelled from the doorway, lighting a cigarette. "What are you doing, standing there like a lemon? Grab the broom. There's confetti and trash in the gutter. Clean it up before the venue manager comes out, or I'm docking your pay." Sterling looked at the broom leaning against the wet brick wall. It was a push broom with stiff plastic bristles. He looked at the empty street where Jordan Banks had vanished into greatness. Slowly, Ricky Sterling pocketed the money. He walked over to the wall. He picked up the broom. He bent his back, the arthritis flaring in his spine, and he began to sweep the gutter. Swish, swish, swish. The sound of the broom against the pavement was the only music left for him. And that is the story of how one man's arrogance collided with destiny. Ricky Sterling thought he was the predator, but he failed to realize he was standing on the runway of karma. Jordan Banks didn't just survive, he soared, proving that true power isn't about a badge or a gun. It's about character. What do you think? Did Sterling deserve that ending? Or was the pity Jordan showed him a punishment worse than prison? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.